Chapter 4, A Fated Meeting. Natsu stood on a hill, overlooking a largely unexplored branch of the forest of Metso. He had been traveling for 3 days, resting 3 times a day, for 1 hour each, not including sleep. It was a testament to his great stamina, especially considering the rough terrain that ruled the forest. He was hoping to find a human settlement, to have his first go at human relations after not seeing them for 4 years. From what little he could remember, some were nice, while others were rather mean. A part of him was actually hoping to find his old village. But luck was not on his side. No village, not even his, appeared to be in the vicinity. It was all forest. Perhaps he had gone in the wrong direction? No, he couldn't have, for he didn't even remember where his old village was, or the name of it. He could remember one thing, though. There was a magic guild there, and its name was Drake Nakalite, the guild he remembered his biological parents were members of when they abandoned him. Now that Ragio was not there anymore to be his father, his family, and his world, Natsu had fleeting thoughts about his biological parents. But he could barely remember them. In fact, the only thing he could remember was his mother's striking pink hair and onyx eyes exactly like his. He couldn't exactly pinpoint what his feelings for them were. On one side, there was anger, rage, despair, and sadness. The other, however, exhibited indifference. He would go as far as to say he was glad he was abandoned by them. If they hadn't done so, he wouldn't have met Ragio, he wouldn't have learned Lightning Dragon Slayer magic, and he wouldn't be as strong as he currently was. Granted, he was extremely strong for a child, but still strong nonetheless. He unconsciously began to wander into the realm of the what-if. How could he not, for it was a rather tempting subject. So many questions ran through his mind, and so many possibilities. However, his voice of logic spoke out, drowning any and all thought of what-ifs. Right now was not the time for such thinking. He was alone in the forest, without Ragio to watch over him. He had to take care of himself, for if he didn't, he would be a wyvern snack and toothpick. How would he be able to keep his promise of making his father proud if he were dead? No, he had to be alert. He had to use his greatly augmented senses to fish out any danger that could be lurking nearby. A piercing shriek sounded nearby, killing off the peaceful silence that began to settle over him. Natsu knew exactly what it was, a wyvern. Idly, he remembered that this section of the forest, apart from being unexplored, was one of the most dangerous according to Ragio. He knew that wyverns were not the only dangerous creatures he would face if he were to venture forward. In other words, it was training for him. Facing the direction where the shriek originated, Natsu waited patiently for his next training dummy to show up. He didn't have to wait long, as a green wyvern burst from the trees and bounded straight towards the pink-haired boy. With a rather confident, cocky smirk, Natsu proudly took the battle stance his father had taught him, summoning forth his magic power. Blue lightning began to dance around his body, arcing away and striking random parts of the hill. Without any more thought, he lunged forward at an unprecedented speed. Lightning Dragons charged. Throwing his lightning-enhanced right fist forward, he attempted to smash the wyvern and end the fight quickly, but the draconian creature had other plans. For it deftly evaded the blow by flying over him. That action didn't deter Natsu in the slightest. He was used to having creatures evade his attacks occasionally, with wyverns being the top perpetrators of that single action. Landing on the ground, skidding and breaking it up as he went, Natsu began charging another attack in his hands. Lightning Dragon's Bolt Cannon. A multitude of dangerously charged laser-like lightning bolts shot towards the wyvern, who attempted to dodge again. This time, though, it wasn't so lucky. Shrieking loudly in pain as a few of the bolts struck it, the wyvern tried to lunge towards Natsu, but the pink-haired dragon slayer was not going to let it. Lightning Dragon's Roar. Employing the same finisher on the wyvern he had defeated a few days earlier, Natsu took a deep breath and struck the wyvern almost at point-blank range, flying back due to the shockwave emitted by the blast. His landing, however, wasn't bad, for he landed on his feet and skidded back once again, this time a lesser distance. When the dust cloud that had emerged cleared, he could clearly see the seemingly unconscious wyvern sprawled on the ground, small arcs of lightning sporadically trailing across its body. He cried out his victory with glee, jumping up and down slightly. He was about to call out to the forest when... "Oh, I forgot again. Raggio isn't here anymore," he whispered morosely, thinking about his deceased father. He didn't want to grieve him. It was not because he didn't love him. Nothing could be farther from the truth. He loved him greatly, still did so. But he did not want to mourn him. He wanted to celebrate him and be happy, knowing that no matter where he went, Raggio would always be there for him. As recent and as hurtful as it was, Raggio's death had spurred him to train harder than ever before. He needed to, for he had to beat the crap out of Acnologia. But, for that, he needed to achieve Dragon Force and find Igneal. And he obviously knew that Dragon Force would not be achieved on its own. There was no time to grieve. His train of thought was interrupted when he heard more shrieks emanating from somewhere in the forest. It seemed the ruckus he caused when fighting the wyvern attracted more of them. With all the noise they were making, he could not exactly make out the number of wyverns headed towards him. But he suspected it was between 2 to 5 of them. He sighed softly, before grinning once again. Bring it. About an hour later, a rather winded, yet very satisfied Natsu Dragio was sitting on a tree root, a few miles away from the battlefield where he managed to take on 3 wyverns by himself. It was not easy, though, not by a long shot. The night pack intelligence they exhibited was disconcerting and more than a little distressing. There were a few moments when Natsu wondered if he was going to be wyvern food by the end of the day. But, to his slight relief, he prevailed with the use of raining lightning. The sun was beginning to set, and Natsu still had not come close to a village. He was beginning to get slightly worried. He did not remember the forest of Metso being that large. Then again, all he ever really saw of the forest was a few miles outside the cave. He had his face buried in a book he had taken out of his pocket dimension. After Raggio's passing, he had kept up with his studies with renewed vigor. He would go through books at a slightly accelerated pace, but not to the point where he would read a whole new book each day. He was good, but not that good. He looked up, idly wondering if he should sleep on a tree branch as he had done the past 3 nights. It was then that it hit him, a scent, unlike anything he had smelled during his time in the forest. He got up, curiously looking in the direction of the smell. After racking his brain for a while longer, he began to detect the distinct feeling the aroma gave away. It was almost human. Natsu's eyes widened. Had he done it? Had he found a village to stay in? Almost shouting in glee, Natsu requipped everything he had into his pocket dimension before taking off towards the supposed village in a full sprint. It took less time than he had suspected to arrive, possibly around 15 minutes tops. He expected to take a lot longer than that. He subconsciously pinned it on his already rather unnatural speed. The village was the typical. Chapter 4, A Fated Meeting. Natsu stood on a hill, It was small, with humble houses spread out through a small piece of land and roads made of dirt. Bushes full of differently colored flowers littered the space between the houses, and there were a few trees here and there. At the center of the village stood a group of slightly larger buildings. Natsu assumed that the largest of them was the local market, and the one at the very center of the plaza was the village leader's home. The other building seemed to be a clinic, if the sign was any indication. Even in the dying hours of the day, there was still a fair amount of activity outside. A few adult women were outside tending to the bushes, and a few men were pulling small carts full of various things. A group of 3 children were playing outside with makeshift weapons and uttering mock-wa cries. He was almost instantly captivated by the scene. The children looked around his age, and they were having so much fun together. The large smiles on their faces hinted the immense happiness they felt to be amongst friends. Was that how Natsu would have grown if his parents hadn't abandoned him? Would he have had an actual childhood, filled with friends of his same species? He paused. Why was he thinking like that? He had to stop delving into the realm of the what-ifs. He grew up with Ragio, and he absolutely enjoyed it. He would have not have wanted it any other way. And it was true, he didn't want it any other way. If he hadn't met Ragio that night 4 years ago, he would not be who he was today. He would not be unnaturally strong and fit for a 9-year-old boy, he would not have the knowledge he possessed, and, most of all, he would not be a lightning dragon slayer. Who are you? Natsu yelped slightly and jumped forwards when a high-pitched voice called from right behind him. He was about to summon his lightning and attack whoever managed to sneak past his enhanced senses, but he stopped abruptly when he saw who it was. This time he was truly instantly mesmerized. In front of him was, in his honest opinion, the prettiest girl he had ever seen, not that he had seen many. She looked to be about his age, if not a year younger. She looked at him with big, innocent chocolate brown orbs for eyes and had hair of a beautiful scarlet that rained down onto her upper back, with one bang covering her right eye. She wore a slightly loose black shirt and black shorts with, oddly, blue sandals. I'm sorry, she apologized profusely. I didn't mean to scare you, was Natsu's bright answer. Oh, the forest, she repeated. Chapter 4. Oh, don't worry about it. It's no big deal, hey, Erza. Come join us. You're not from around here, are you? Asked the now identified Erza, ignoring the call. Natsu shook his head. Where you from? The forest, answered Natsu nonchalantly, slightly confused by the soft gasp from the redhead girl. The forest, she repeated in a tone akin to awe. What would someone like you be doing there? Come on, Erza. Well, I've lived there for the past 4 years, replied Natsu, as if it were an everyday thing. 4 years, she repeated once again, this time disbelievingly. Come on, stop lying. Full-fledged adult wizards have a hard time staying in there for 1 day. And you say you've been there for 4 years? PFFT, I don't believe you, well, that's because I am a wizard, said Natsu boldly. Prove it, she challenged, eyeing him suspiciously. Natsu grinned, raising his hand and opening his palm upward in front of her. He summoned forth a bolt of blue lightning, increasing its size a few times and letting it arc around the entirety of his arm. She looked at the crackling lightning in utter astonishment. She was not expecting another child wielding magic like her, and to such a high degree. Her adoptive grandfather had secretly begun teaching her about magic a few months ago, his reason being the abnormally high amount of magical energy he sensed in her. He had told her that there would be other children out there wielding magic just like her, but this, she was not expecting. How old was the child in front of her when he began to learn about magic? Not to mention, it was lightning magic, an element that, according to her grandfather, was very difficult to wield. Yet, here she was, witnessing a child doing it. She had seen her fair share of traveling wizards using lightning magic. But, when those wizards used it, it just didn't feel right. The lightning felt tainted, besmirched by something she could not identify. This boy's lightning, however, did not exude that same feeling. It felt raw, pure, powerful. None of that taint she felt in other wizards was found in his lightning. And, to top it off, it was a royal blue, her absolute favorite color. Hey, Urza, why aren't you? Whoa. Before they knew it, the kids that were mock fighting had surrounded the duo, gawking in amazement at Natsu's ability to wield magic. That's so cool, said one of the boys, the others nodding in response. Natsu let it dance around his arm for a few seconds, before letting it dissipate. When it was gone, all the kids, except Urza, almost pouted, as if their favorite candy was taken from them. Urza was still looking at him in astonishment, and it took her a few seconds to regain herself. Well, that's cool and everything, she began, trying to sound haughty and dismissive, when in reality she was just as much in awe as everyone else. But that still doesn't prove you lived in the forest for 4 years. You're right, Natsu replied. I think nothing I do or say will be able to prove what I said. I would take you, but it's getting late, and the wyverns are more active at night, for some odd reason. How did you learn magic? She asked. Oh, my dad taught me, Natsu replied jovially. It seemed to be the wrong thing to say, for Urza looked down in apparent sadness. Where is he, your dad? She asked. At that question, Natsu's shoulders sagged slightly, his eyes taken on an forlorn look. He died 3 days ago. I've been traveling alone ever since, Natsu replied softly, looking straight into Urza's eyes. She almost gasped at the nigh overwhelming amount of raw sincerity he conveyed through just that look. I'm not lying. I've really done those things. Urza couldn't help but believe him with that final statement. The amount of sincerity in his tone alone was almost enough to convince her, but the look in his onyx eye sealed the deal completely. What's your name? She asked softly, hoping the change in topic would lighten up his mood slightly. It worked, a little too well. My name's Natsu, he replied cheerfully. Natsu Dragio. You, Urza, she replied, smiling faintly. Simon Mikazuchi, replied the tallest of the boys, waving his hand at him. He was dressed rather nicely for running around and mock fighting, and he had slightly long dark hair and black eyes. Jugo Koslo, said the boy with blonde spiky hair and green eyes, waving shyly. And I'm Darius. Darius Windstone, said the last. They smiled at him, Simon an honest one. Jugo Koslo, said the boy with blonde spiky hair and green eyes, waving shyly. And I'm Darius. Darius Windstone, said the last of the boys, rather boisterously pointing at himself. He had straight, light brown hair and gray eyes. It's nice to meet you all, spoke Natsu honestly. They smiled at him, Simon an honest one, Jugo a shy one, and Darius a rather cocky one. Urza only smiled prettily at him. Since when did you know how to use magic? Asked Jugo. I've known how to use my magic since I was 6 years old, Natsu replied earnestly, earning surprised looks from the children. Seriously? Asked Simon. That's how old my sister Kagura is. You've known magic since then? Natsu only nodded, smiling brightly at his new acquaintance, possibly friend. He was about to question Simon about his sister when he heard 3 distinctive shouts. Big bro, Jugo, Darius. The first was high-pitched and feminine, belonging to a young girl. The second was a tad deeper, yet still distinctively feminine. The third was the deepest of them all, a deep baritone that resounded throughout their meeting spot, a male voice. I have to go, Natsu. That was my mom. See ya. It was nice to meet you, Jugo exclaimed as he ran towards one of the houses to the left of them. In the front door a pretty, blonde woman with Hugo's exact eyes was waiting for him. Well, that's my dad, guys. See you tomorrow, Darius spoke cockily. Natsu, 'twas nice meeting ya, man. Take care. For Simon, a shorter girl ran up to him, with traditional Japanese princess-style hair that extended down her back, slightly more so than Urza's, and big, bright hazel eyes. She wore a white, short-sleeved blouse with a blue pleated skirt and white shoes. She had a white headband tying her hair back, with a distinctive ribbon at the very top. In other words, she was a very pretty young girl. "Big bro, mommy's calling you," she said as she stopped in front of him, smiling cutely. "All right, sis, I'll be there in a bit," Simon replied, patting the girl's head, making her look down and blush prettily. "Oh, by the way, Natsu, this is my little sister, Kagura." Natsu smiled at her and extended his hand in greeting. "Hey, Kagura, nice to meet you." "I'm Natsu Dragio. Kagura blushed brighter and hid behind Simon's back, mumbling incoherently. Urza chuckled softly. She knew that Kagura was actually rather shy when meeting new people, even if she was an outgoing little hurricane afterwards. "Aw, come on, Kagura. Don't be shy. Natsu's actually pretty cool, and he knows magic," Simon encouraged, laughing as he did so. She huffed cutely, stepped away from Simon, and walked towards Natsu. "It's nice to meet you, Natsu," she greeted, quickly taking his hand, shaking it, and stepping away from him. She was still pretty red in her cheeks, but once her mind processed Simon's last statement, she grew excited. "You know how to do magic. Show me." "Show me." Natsu laughed mirthfully, and extended his hand in front of him. "All right, I will." Without another word, he surrounded his hand in royal blue lightning, letting it course through his entire body this time. The three kids stepped back, their eyes wide in amazement. This time, the large amount of crackling lightning attracted more of the villagers, who were staring at the pink-haired 9-year-old in surprise. Out of the village's centermost building emerged a particular elder man, with long, graying eyebrows. A long gray beard and waist-length gray hair with 2 locks shooting upward in antenna-like fashion. He, too, looked at the boy, his eyebrows raised expectantly, but his black eyes remaining squinted. "Want me to show you an attack?" Natsu asked, completely unaware of the attention he was garnering. Kagura squealed excitedly, always wanting to see magic in use. Simon laughed while nodding eagerly, an action emulated by Urza. "All right, here it goes." Natsu took a deep breath, gathering a large amount of electricity in his mouth. As he did so, he turned around and faced away from the village, not wanting to hurt anyone. Lightning dragons roared. The large beam of electricity he was so familiar with shot from his mouth into the forest, disappearing beyond the trees. However, that was not the last they had seen from the powerful attack, for a few seconds later, a large, dome-shaped electrical explosion ensued, shaking the ground they were standing on ever so slightly. At this, the old man's eyes shot wide open in a look of absolute shock. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing in front of him. First was the child's incredible power. No child the age of 9 possessed power surpassing that of full-blown S-class wizards. Well, not normal ones. And second was the fact that the child was a dragon slayer, those legendary humans that wielded one of the most powerful branches of lost magic, used for the sole purpose of killing the mightiest creatures the world had ever seen, dragons. Almost automatically, he walked towards the child, thoughts racing through his head a mile a second. A dragon slayer here of all places? How can it be, he thought. Then, he chuckled softly as another thought surged. Makarov would have a field day if he were in my place. Urza was in shock. Her eyes were as wide as they could go, and her jaw was hanging loosely, unable to be closed consciously. She had just witnessed one of the most powerful attacks she had ever seen in her short life, and it was performed by a child her age. She could honestly say she had not even seen such power in Grandpa Rob, a full-blown wizard. She managed to twist her head towards her friends Simon and Kagura, only to see the same stunned expression on the both of them. She heard soft chuckling coming from Natsu, along with a spoken phrase that she could not discern. "Simon, Kagura, time to go," called out a feminine voice. "Yes, mommy, coming," replied Simon, before turning to Natsu. Gotta go. That was an awesome attack, Natsu. Bye, Urza. Hope to see you tomorrow. Let's go, Kagura. Kagura nodded, shyly waving goodbye to both Natsu and Urza before running right behind her brother. Now that they were alone, Natsu and Urza stared at each other, almost as if in a trance. Her eyes seemed almost blank, yet at the same time seemed to be studying him. That was incredible, she said softly. He blushed slightly in embarrassment, but still smiled brightly. Thanks, never in my life did I imagine that I would be meeting one of the legendary dragon slayers of old. Here in Rosemary Village of all places, spoke an elderly voice, snapping them out of their trance and making them jump around in surprise. Snapping them out of their trance and making them jump around in surprise. Grandpa Rob, Urza announced, slightly shakily. You know what he is, of course, my child. He is a dragon slayer, a wizard who wields the only magic capable of hurting the mighty dragons. Dragon slayer magic, replied Rob, shocking Urza senseless. He then addressed the pink-haired boy. Tell me, child, how old are you? I'm 9, answered Natsu tentatively, using his enhanced hearing to fish out a few of the mutterings that had begun to spring forth due to his usage of magic. He was inwardly happy that all of them were mostly positive. 9 years old and already wielding such incredible power. You, my child, have an amazing amount of potential, Rob stated with a smile, making Natsu blush again in embarrassment and rub the back of his head. Now, where are you from? Natsu didn't respond, for Urza had beaten him to it. He says he's from the forest, Grandpa Rob, and that he's lived there for 4 years. Where's your dragon parent? Asked Rob. Natsu looked at him, slightly surprised that the old man did not question the truthfulness of his statement. However, when he registered the question completely, he saddened slightly. My father's dead. He died 3 days ago, Natsu replied softly. Ah, I'm so sorry, child, said Rob, placing a comforting hand on Natsu's shoulder. It helped the pink-haired dragon slayer slightly. I'm guessing you are looking for a place to stay. Natsu nodded, not looking up. Well, why don't you stay with Urza and I? Asked Rob, smiling warmly at the child. There was just something about him that was likable beyond all reason. We do have a few extra rooms in my home. Natsu's demeanor brightened exponentially. Would you really do that for me? Of course, child. I would never let a child suffer without a roof. My home is the one in the middle, next to the clinic, answered Rob, beginning his small trip home, shadowed by Urza. Now, do you have any stuff with you? Natsu nodded, following closely. Yeah, but I don't have it with me. It's in my pocket dimension. Oh, show me, child, challenged Rob. Natsu nodded once again, raising his hands up while Urza looked at him with a bit of confusion. Requit. A bright flash of yellow light ensued in front of Natsu, taking the shape of one of Rajo's gift chests. Leaving it to be seen for a few seconds, he called it back into his pocket dimension. Ah, requit. Truly a helpful little piece of magic, very useful both in and out of battle, Rob summarized. One of the branches of magic I'm attempting to teach little Urza, in fact. It was Urza's turn to blush in embarrassment at the nickname given to her. Stop it, Grandpa, she muttered, attempting to sound chiding, but not sounding anything like that. Ah, well, if you so wish, Natsu, I could give you a few tips on further increasing your affinity for lightning magic, the old man offered, chuckling slightly at Urza's redness. He earned an almost hungry gleam from Natsu. I am by no means a master of lightning, with fire magic being my primary affinity. But I could still give you some tips. Natsu nodded, while Rob paused, apparently thinking about something. I don't know whether it was a coincidence or Lady Fate working her magic, but it so happens that little Urza has an incredible affinity for fire magic as well, easily surpassing mine. I was floored when I saw that. In fact, I would go as far as to say that her affinity for fire rivals yours for lightning, Rob stated conversationally. Natsu's eyes were wide in surprise. Urza had an affinity for fire magic? And it supposedly rivaled his? That was awesome. His thoughts quickly trailed to the lacrima of fire dragon slayer magic he held in one of his chests. Could he have found a worthy bearer of that lacrima so quickly? He shook his head internally. No, he would wait until he made sure she was worthy. Sure, she seemed like a very good person, but still, he had to be cautious. He couldn't give the lacrima to just anybody. Well, here we are, child, Rob announced, snapping him out of his thoughts. My home? Go right in, make yourself at home. I do hope you stay for some time. I can see that the children of Rosemary Village have taken a shine to you, Urza included. The silent Urza was really having a hard time keeping her face a color that was not remotely close to her hair. She looked anywhere but at Natsu or Grandpa Rob. Natsu, however, was smiling brightly. He had found a new place to stay in, and already made new friends. He had found a possible new bearer for the lacrima Igneel had entrusted to Raggio, and by extension, him. Last, but certainly not least, he was a step closer to finding a magic guild. Hey guys, please make sure to subscribe and like the video.